friends here. Good evening to all of you. And first, this Professor Patnaik, I know him for the last 2 or 3 decades. And our association was with the Jodian Linguistic Association. Whenever there were conferences in many places, we used to meet. And he used to come with a good number of PhD students. And then we used to meet and then talk and share many ideas. Once again, it is a very happy occasion for me to preside over this. First of all, I want to thank the Tamil Moliyal Sangam and its president, Dr. Professor Karnagaran, and Secretary Professor Balasubramaniam for continuously organizing these talks without any fail. So this is a very nice meeting, and we all of us were able to meet and share some of the ideas. And this occasion, Professor B.N. Patnaik, he is giving a lecture on generative enterprise on outsider's perspective. Actually, there is no need of any introduction to Professor Patnaik because he is a well-known linguist both nationally and internationally. Since the younger generation who are new to linguistics may not know his background, so this is for the newcomers in the linguistics team. Before this, I must tell these people from the Department of Linguistics, Tamil University, both Mr. Dr. Muralidharan and Dr. Rajendran, were sent to Kanpur, and they were trained in the computational linguistics and natural language processing. And it was the point of connection for us, and from that our departments were able to work together. This is one thing. That way, Professor Rajendran, he developed the computational things in the Department of Linguistics, Tamil University. Now, I will not take much time because I am interested to listen to Professor Patnaik's lecture because it is I am also interested in that area. Just I will briefly introduce him and then leave the way for him to give his talk. First, he got his MA degree in English language and literature from Utkal University, Orissa, in 1964. Then after that, then he got his PhD from the CIFL. He worked on the thesis complementation in Odia and English in 1977. And so he was earlier from the literature, he moved to linguistics, and that too in the generative theory. And then his professional experience, he worked as a lecturer in Government College of Odisha and in 64 to 76. And then he moved to 76 to 78 associate professor, JNU Imphal Center. And then from there, he moved to NCERT as a reader, 78. And then he moved to IIT Kanpur in 78. And in 1985, he became professor of IIT Kanpur. And from there, he worked in that institution. And there, he supervised many students for a PhD degree. And they were trained in generative framework. And they were working mostly, if I remember, they were mostly working during those periods on government and binding theory. So he trained many young people, and they were now in various places in important positions. And then he was a visiting professor, philosophy of University of Rajasthan. and then Indian Institute of Advanced Study, and then he was in Annamalai University also. And then he held various positions, CIR 84, from 84, 86, CFL member, CFL Society member, and then he was the member of the editorial board, South Asian Language Review. Then he was the head Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kanpur. Then he was vice president in Dravidian Linguistics Association, member of the board of governors, IIT Kanpur. Then he was deputy editor, International Journal of Dravidian Linguistics, and he was head Center for Creative Writing and Publication, a member TDIL working group, Ministry of Information and Technology, Government of India. So he has worked in many capacities, linguistics and academic bodies also. Further, he has he has undertook many projects, research projects. One is knowledge-based computational linguistic research for Indian languages, funded by the Ministry of IIT, Government of India. Then the other one, mission-aided translation from English to Hindi by the Government of India. And then foundations of Indian logic and linguistics, Government of India. Co-investigator were Rajiv Sangal. So he has taken many research projects also. And then he submitted this co-author, he was co-investigator or other thing, and then they submitted many projects. And then the publications also important. One is the architecture of language. Noam Chomsky. It was edited by Professor Patnaik and Mukherjee and Agnihotri. They all together, they edited and then they published this book. It is an important book, even though it is a very small book, and it is a very important, and mostly it is an interview based. And then there is science and tradition, then engineering, environment and society, aspects of human communication. All these things are edited with other people, and they were all published. And there was one unpublished manuscript. I think by this time it might have been published, towards an alternative theory of binding. Professor Patnaik may give information more about this one. And then he has published many articles in various areas of linguistics, in comparative grammatical traditions and linguistic theory, and then Odia syntax, sociolinguistics, natural language processing, and then language use, language teaching, and other topics. So his publications covers many areas of linguistics, and comparative grammatical traditions and linguistic theory. He has published around 9 articles, and then Odia syntax, 14 articles, sociolinguistics, 10, natural language processing, 8, language use, language teaching, and others, 3. It may be around more than 50 articles. Of course, maybe more. He might not have included some of them. So he has published many articles in various journals, and he has wide knowledge of linguistics. And at present, he is interested in generative syntax, history of ideas in generative linguistics, computational linguistics, communication, Odia folklore, academic interest, and now current research is diachronic syntax of Odia, comparative linguistic tradition. So these are some of the areas he is interested and then working, and he is continuously working. As we say that after our retirement, it is not, we are, as academicians are always working and they are dynamic. So in that way, he is continuously working, and I must say that I listened to his lecture last time on literal and non-literal meaning. And I took that from that lecture, the non-literal meaning, and I am working the non-literal meaning areas in Tolkapiam also. So he was a main instrument for me to move that side. So I must thank him also. So with this brief introduction, I, I will give the way to Professor Patnaik to give his talk on uh, the generative enterprise on outsider's perspective, because this is an interesting area. One important thing about generative syntax or generative theory is people have to say either you agree or disagree. So it is a focus point. So without touching that one, you cannot move to linguistics in that area. So that way, this is an important area and interesting area. So I'm also very much interested to listen to his lectures. So I invite Professor Patnaik to give his lectures. Thank you. Kamachi?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Am I audible?
Yes, audible, sir.
Okay, can I speak now?
Okay, yes, sir, you can start now.
Okay, so namaste, everybody.
It is audible, sir.
Huh?
Audible, sir. Audible.
Okay.
Please start.
Yeah. I'll have to take just a medicine, huh?
Okay.
Go ahead.
That is
All right.
So namaste, everybody. It is great. It is a great delight for me to be among friends. Absolutely great delight. Please believe me. I mean, this is a moment for me it's a moment for me to cherish. So many friends, I haven't met for many years, but whenever we had met earlier, we were very close to each other, had spent wonderful time at different places. So I'm delighted to see you all, sirs. So, and thank you very much for giving me this opportunity of interacting with you. I'm really grateful. I'm really, really grateful. Okay, so let me the topic I have chosen is the generative enterprise and outsider's perspective. Now I'll just say one thing about being an outsider. See, once upon a time, from 1974, let us say 74-5 till I retired, I was either doing generative linguistics or teaching generative linguistics. But once I retired, I shifted, my research interest shifted, and I got interested in classical Odia literature. And that became a field that was extremely engaging. So I could not afford, I couldn't get time to work on both. That is why I shifted to pragmatics and got interested in questions like non-literal meaning and things like that, which are extremely important to me. Pragmatics is extremely important to me. But every moment, I cherish every moment I did generative linguistics. And one of my regrets is that I am not able to read as much Chomsky as I would have liked to read. Now, so let me now let me begin saying this. When Chomsky came into the field, then linguistics changed. And linguistics changed in a way which was at that particular point of time was probably unpredictable. Okay, so I'll try and quickly sort of narrate that story. There will be no technical linguistics, absolutely nothing. Unless it is extremely necessary, I will not talk technical linguistics. But I will only sort of try and talk about a fantastic journey of a discipline, kind of a fantastic story of a discipline, which started as which started as a field of grammar to a field of what we call biolinguistics. Now that kind of story. Okay, so traditionally, those who were interested in the study of language where one, grammarians, today we call them linguists, no? Grammarians, two, philosophers, particularly logicians, and three, rhetoricians, and then literary critics. But literary critics were never, quite enthusiastic about grammar as such. They were interested in language, but not in grammar. In fact, the grammarians and the literary critics, for thousands of years, don't have a very kind of healthy relationship. Okay, so in any case, so these were the kinds of people who were interested in language and its study. Now there are others. Now the philosophers are interested, and those who are interested in language continue to be interested in language. But in addition to, let us say, people who are doing artificial intelligence, particularly those who are doing NLP, NLU, and their applications like machine translation and things like that, okay, and neurologists, and biologists, evolutionary biologists. So there are new people now interested in this. Now, so the field has changed. So I would like to, I would like to try and talk about how the story of how the field changed from being concerned with grammar to something like neurolinguistics and all that. Sorry, something like biolinguistics. So that's the kind of thing that I'll briefly say. Okay, let's go back to, it's always, one of these, I have always found an idea of T.S. Eliot very fascinating. And it is this. Eliot's idea is that, that a poet belongs to a tradition, he benefits from the tradition, and he also contributes to the tradition. So that is, if we sort of apply the same idea to the field of knowledge, then then let's say Chomsky or anyone, see, we situate them in a knowledge tradition, so they benefit from the tradition, and also they contribute to the tradition. So my perspective will be this. So Chomsky benefited from the linguistic tradition of that that he received, and he contributed. So this is the kind of idea. Now we cannot go. If we talk about history of ideas in linguistics and how to situate Chomsky in the in this narrative of history of ideas in linguistics, then this is the kind of thing that we will do. What did he get? What did he sort of receive from the tradition, and what did he contribute to it? Okay. Now, you see, it is when Chomsky's syntactic structures was published, somebody at MIT who was a graduate student, but whom Chomsky calls more a colleague than a student, and his Lees, and Lees, brought out an article, it's kind of review of the book in which he talked about, linguistics. Linguistics at the sort of which was undergoing a revolution. Okay, so but Chomsky never encouraged that kind of a perspective. That he never said that that linguistics, the kind of linguistics that that once generative linguistics happened, there was a linguistic revolution. He didn't really sort of encourage that idea. In fact, he jocularly said, see, one of his colleagues had published a book called The Structure of Scientific Revolution, and Chomsky jocularly said that, you see, once that book was published, people started seeing revolution everywhere. Okay, so he said, no, linguistics is not, at a revolutionary stage. Has not really, undergone any revolution. Why he said that are very fascinating, but I don't have time to get into that. He's beautiful. The reasons he gave, what is revolution and all that. But anyway, coming back, I'll only say that, you see, when a revolution takes place in the field of knowledge, as in other fields, in the field of knowledge, the tradition, the past, is not entirely forgotten. It stays for some time, maybe for a long time, And one thing I'll say that when generative linguistics that Chomsky introduced, sort of the past that it carried with it is in the form of phrase structure rules. Phrase structure rules are nothing but a formalization of IC analysis. I mean, we are all people at a certain age, we all know IC analysis. The youngsters these days, they don't know probably. Because, I don't know whether people teach structural linguistics these days, but in any case, so but IC analysis was formalized in a certain manner, and they were called phrase structure rules in Chomsky. So that phrase structure rules continued in Chomskyan linguistics. In Chomsky added transformational rules, but phrase structure rules continued. So to the extent that phrase structure rules continued, we can say, although the grammar actually was a kind of, sort of very new kind of grammar, revolutionary or not, or semi-revolutionary, it did not completely break with the tradition. The tradition continued through phrase structure rules. Phrase structure rules are just nothing but a kind of formalization of, IC analysis. Okay, now, see, so what Chomsky did was, he added transformational rules to phrase structure rules, and then some morphophonemic rules and all that. We don't really have to worry about that. Okay, but the point is that Chomsky started asking questions which were not asked by the structural linguists. For example, Chomsky asked the question: there is a relationship between active and passive. Okay, there is a relationship between active and passive. There is a relationship between sentences. Between a sentence like that he is coming is true, and it is true that he is coming. So sentences like these also are related in some way. So that is also this question of sentence relationship. So he said that sentence relationship is something which structural linguistics could not handle. Therefore, it was necessary to introduce transformational rule system into the system. Okay. Now the structural linguist said, I am only telling a story. The structural linguist said that this is not fair. You can't really criticize us like that, because we didn't try to do that. We analyze sentences. And we did not try to see sentence relationships. We didn't study that. So if active and passive are related, and if a sentence and its extraposed version are related, these were not our concern, so we didn't do that. And you can't blame us for we can't be criticized for what we did not try to do or what we are not doing. You can only blame us or find fault with us for, or criticize us for what we are doing, but not what we never did. And fair enough, because today, if you ask Chomsky, yeah, fine, you are doing a wonderful sentence grammar, okay, but what about discourse? You haven't done any work on discourse. So Chomsky would say, no, my project is not about discourse. My project is, let us say, about sentence grammar. Let us say, that is what he said earlier. During those days when he was questioned about this discourse and all that, Chomsky said that Chomsky said that in all traditions, whether European, whether Greek or Indian or whatever, people have talked about sentence grammar all the time. Discourse has not been a part of has not been a part of grammar writing. Okay, so grammar has not been concerned with discourse. Mainstream, I'm talking about mainstream grammar has not been concerned with discourse in any culture, in any linguistic culture, whether Indian or Greek. So he said he is only doing whatever people are doing. That if others did sentence grammar, he was also doing sentence grammar. He did not do any discourse. So we can't, just as we can't blame Chomsky for not doing discourse, because that was not what he was trying to do. Similarly, we can't find fault with structural linguists for not talking about sentence relationship or accounting for sentence relationships, because that is not what they were doing. Okay, but what did the structural, but let's see, what they were doing. See, they said to my mind, the structural linguists are those who, for the first time in the history of linguistics, said that linguistics is a science. The claim that linguistics is a science was not made by anybody earlier, but that was made by the structural linguists. And they said linguistics is a classificatory science. I'm quoting, classificatory science. So classificatory science would mean that, you neatly organize your data and classify them and label them. Okay. So what does it mean? So, we talk about nouns, verbs, whatever. And, and when you talk about nouns and verbs, so rigorously, rigorously distinguish between them. They, in fact, did not want to, they call them type 1, type 2, type 3, type 4 kind of, words. So what they did was they took words and then categorized them. Okay, because linguistics is a classificative discipline. So the principles of classification were extremely rigid and very good. Okay, very rigid, and the work was very useful and very valuable use kind of thing. So for example, traditional linguistics, they got rid of semantically driven notions like noun is a name and verb is, an activities and all that. So those did not clearly distinguish between, these words. Therefore, they came up with new criteria and they set up and they classified them rigorously. So if you come to sentence, you see, to be fair to structural linguists, see, the movement started in the early 30s and Chomsky came into the scene, let us say in 55, 57. They didn't have much time. So they had done a good work in phonology, good work in morphology, and they're beginning to work on syntax when Chomsky arrived. And by then, what had they done? Now, you see, if you say that your science is classificatory, then you would expect them to do the following. Sentences would be classified in terms of whether they're active, passive, questions, declaratives, whatever. Okay. Similarly, complex, simple, whatever, compound. So you classify sentences like that. So, you classify sentences like that. So you think that your job is done. Now, Chomsky said, actually, when I was young and so irresponsible and, I used to teach in my class saying that what structural linguists did with respect to syntax or sentences is simply, categorize them and label them. And, that reminded me of Bata shoe shop. 5 number juta, 6 number juta, 7 number juta, compound sentences, complex sentences, simple sentence. So that was very unfair. Okay. But in any case, but see, when you teach in a class, you have to make people interested. So you have to bring, whatever all kinds of tricks you have to make the subject, whatever, you think interesting. In any case. So the point is, so this is what they did. They classified things. Chomsky said that you see, what Chomsky was saying is that, see, science, a mature science cannot be simply classificatory. Classification has to be there, and nobody would contest that. And structuralists did wonderful work on that, but that is not sufficient. So it has to be explanatory. Science has to explain. But then what does science explain? Let us say, we can say, one of the things that science explains is the following. That you see, if the moon is rotating around the earth, then why doesn't it so happen that the moon sort of moves away from the Earth's the moon moves away from the Earth and falls somewhere, okay, or disappears, okay. How is it that the moon sort of moves around the Earth, rotates around the Earth? Why does it happen? Why doesn't it just move away and get lost? Why does it happen like this? So that's something which science explains. And similarly, science also tries to explain, it's okay that's what happens in the, it's an extraterrestrial phenomenon. But apple also, when you throw something up, then apple also falls on the ground. Now, why does that happen? And then, then when you combine these two, apple falling on earth and the moon not flying off in a tangent, these are two different things. One is earthly, the other is, extraterrestrial. Now, when you combine them and say that these two things have the same explanation, gravity, same explanation, then you say you have achieved a progress in science. This is explanation. Now, what are we going to explain in linguistics? So Chomsky said, yes, we have things to explain. And he said, for example, that flying planes can be dangerous. Now, flying planes can be dangerous. It is ambiguous. Flying planes is dangerous, is unambiguous. How is that flying planes can be dangerous is ambiguous and not, when you sort of say flying planes is dangerous, why is it not ambiguous? Take another sentence. The troops stopped drinking. When we say the troops stopped drinking, we know that the troops stopped other people from drinking, but it also means the troops stopped themselves from drinking. Okay, so how is it that this is ambiguous? Okay, sorry. This is ambiguous, but how do you explain this ambiguity? So let us say this is one thing that needs to be explained. Okay, I just one or two more examples. Yeah, and his own example. All these are his examples of Paul Postals of somebody. They're not. I'm not constructing them. Yeah, he said that, let us look at these three: the raising of the flowers, the growling of the lions, and the shooting of the hunters. Familiar examples, The raising of the flowers, there is the relation between the flowers and raise is a relation between an object and the verb. Raising of the flowers. Flowers are the object of raise. Growling of the lions, growl and lions. So lions is the subject of growl. That is the subject relationship. But if we say the shooting of the hunters, so shooting has both an object relation and a subject relation with the hunters. In that sense, it is ambiguous. So let us say ambiguity, or active-passive relationship, or sentence and its extraposed version relationship. So at that time, in the beginning, he was saying that all these are facts about language, and these facts must be explained by linguistic theory. Okay, so let us see what he was trying to do. He was trying to say that linguistics is a proper science, not just a classificatory science. It is not just at the butterfly gathering stage. You collect data and just classify data and label each category. You are doing something more, namely, like mature sciences, you are also trying to explain things. If they are explaining things, like why the moon doesn't fly off the tangent and all that, we are also explaining things like how is it that native speaker understands certain things as ambiguous and all that, etc., etc. So that is one thing that. So you notice that he was bringing explanation into this. Okay, that's a very important thing that actually Chomsky did. Saying that that our science has to be explanatory, and that is the domain of explanation. Okay. Now, the science also, we know that science predicts. There is a prediction. Science, science predicts that things like this will happen. Okay. Now, if linguistics is science, what does it predict? Let's say there is. I won't go into any details. There's no time, or it is not even important. Yeah, not even important. Now, so what does it predict? So let us say I will not go into any details. Based on certain criteria, it says that the complementizer is the subordinator. I believe that John is intelligent, that is the complementizer, the kind of subordinator that we say. So Chomsky said, going by certain features, we don't have to go into them in detail. So Chomsky said that in certain kinds of languages, the complementizer will be to the left. So like English, left of what? Left of the subordinate sentence. Okay, like I believe that John is honest. So that is the complementizer, the subordinator, and John is honest, and that is a clause. So the complementizer, the connector will precede the clause. Okay, and the prediction was that there will be languages in which the complementizer will follow the clause. And let us say Tamil is a language like that. Odia is a language like that. Sort of all these, SOV languages are languages like that. So there is a, so the theory that predicted this is the X bar theory. We don't have to go into X bar theory and all that. We all know that. Okay. So in terms of X bar theory, we know that in case of certain languages, like languages which have a postposition, languages where the object, comes before the verb and all that. So the series of properties like that. So when you have a language like that, the complementizer, the subordinator, that will be to the right, like Tamil. I'm very proud to say that my first PhD student worked on Tamil syntax, and I'm very proud to say this. And she worked on Tamil syntax in the government and binding framework. Okay, Professor Angan, you might have met her also, Geeta. Okay, in any case, so from Geeta, I learned about Tamil grammar. That gave me an exposure to Tamil grammar. But in Kanpur IIT, on the flip side, in Kanpur IIT, and during those days, I was very famous. The reason was people said, "Oh, this guy also knows Tamil." But I only knew Tamil syntax. I didn't know Tamil. But I didn't correct anybody. I said, yeah, I know Tamil. Okay, but I only knew the syntax. Okay, of relevance for the purpose is this, that in Tamil, this Enru is the entity, I may be pronouncing it wrongly, so please forgive me. Enru is the entity which comes after the subordinate clause. Like that John is honest, Enru, I know. In English, I know that John is honest. So that precedes the subordinate clause. Here, that Enru follows the subordinate clause. And Odia is like Tamil in this respect, because we are also an SOV, ours is also an SOV language. But in Odia, we have 4 complementizers. Of interest, present interest is this. We have a complementizer like Boli, which corresponds to Enru. So, so it's a typical case of the predicted by the theory. Okay. But there is also a complementizer called Key. Key is like that. So let us say Boli is also like that, but Boli comes at the end, Key comes wherever, in the beginning of the clause. So I know that John is honest. So here in place of that, I will have Key. Now Key now becomes precedes like in English, but John is honest. Bole, I know that is the typical construction. Okay, so the prediction goes wrong. So Hindi they have only Key but nothing like Bole. So the prediction goes wrong. Okay. Now if the prediction goes wrong, what do? Either you discard the theory. Okay, discard the theory, or do some trick. Add something like say, no, Key is not really a complementizer, but give it a different name and all that, and say, oh, it's like that. It's a certain properties of Key are different from typical complementizers and all that. You do something like that. You do it. Okay. But one thing in science, when you are doing science, just because a theory has counterexamples or some counterexamples, that does not mean that the theory has to be discarded right away. Now, if there are too many counterexamples that are accumulated, then a time might come when you do something with the theory. Either it has to be discarded or it has to be sort of modified in a certain way so as to include the counterexamples as well. So you don't discard the theory. Okay, so that's one. And more importantly, I can't go and say that, look, Odia has 3 or 4 complementizers like this. And not only that, it's not, although it is not bad enough, you see, we have both ki and bole in one sentence. Okay, this is an absurd thing. Both ki and bole, both subordinators. One subordinate clause, 2 subordinators. One, although they're guarding the clause on both fronts. One in the beginning, one at the end. A bizarre, bizarre kind of construction. Okay, so all these things really do not mean that I have to discard the expert theory. If expert theory was discarded, it was for other reasons. Okay, in any case. So the point is that that sometimes the prediction does not go, the prediction doesn't hold. But here there is an important point which I would like to. One thing I have tried to suggest that that merely because there is a kind of counterexample, you do not discard the theory, etc., etc. The other point is that you see, this is what Chomsky kept on saying, because this question came up in many ways throughout, till about 80 or like that. Okay, so the other question the other question was that you can't falsify, that you can't reject the claims of a theory which is deductively arrived at on the basis of unanalyzed raw facts. You can't do that. Historically, when conditions and transformations, he wrote a wonderful paper, Conditions and Transformations, 1973. When that paper was presented, people came up with data to show that condition doesn't really work. That is where Chomsky said, no, if you want to sort of provide a counterexample to this generalization, namely conditions or transformations, it will be falsified, or it will be sort of, the counterexample will be a rule, not unanalyzed data. So we can't take raw data. We can't simply take raw data and attack, and say that these raw data constitute a counterexample or counterexamples to a theoretical observation. That we can't do. So you see, why am I talking about it? Because I'm trying to say, when it was developing to be when Chomsky wanted it to grow as a science, a kind of mature science, then these are the things that had to be looked at. What is a counterexample? What is a counterexample? What would you call proper data, and things like that. So conditions or rules can be falsified by falsified by rules, not by raw data. So these are things which he drew attention to. Okay, and then and in course of yeah, so that was what was happening. Okay, so then let us come to a slightly different point. See, we know that Chomsky added the transformational component to the grammar. The structuralists had phrase structure rules, in the form of IC rules. Okay, and then and then he added transformational component. And there are and in syntactic structures he gives arguments to show that adding transformational component to the grammar simplified the grammar, made the grammar more economical. But the question arises, now, when all those days are over, and so those, you don't have to struggle for existence, or you don't have to fight with any other competing theory, right? When that stage comes, the theory is growing. Then at that stage, you say, "Acha, oh, is that so?" You see, what did you do? They had only, they had a phrase structure rules. Huh? You added transformational rules and a whole level. Now grammar has 2 levels. I'm not talking about morphonemic rules. Grammar has 2 levels. The phrase structure level, that transformational level. And you say that you simplified the grammar. You added a whole level to it. Okay. And and within sort of, when you come to the transformational level, the transformational component had many rules. There was a passive rule, there was an extraposition rule, there was this rule, that rule, raising rule, blah, blah, blah. And, and it was pointed out that, you see, all this is taxonomy. This is not science. This is exactly what the structuralists were doing. This is not fundamentally different. So this is taxonomy. And that argument was taken seriously, that, you have not really simplified anything. You added transformational component, Yeah, I mean, you simplified the grammar, in the way in which you talked about simplification in syntactic structures. But there is a mature way of looking at the notion of simplification. So this is not really simplification. Therefore, what do you do? What do you do? You do two things. One, you have phrase structure rules and you have transformation rules. Okay. Reduce phrase structure rules to the minimum. Reduce phrase structure rules to the minimum. Okay. Number one. And number two, impoverish the transformational component. Impoverish. If possible, manage with one transformational rule. So what have you done? You are now saying, yeah, we still need two levels, but what we are doing is, we have reduced the levels, impoverished the levels in such a way that there are minimum phrase structure rules and the bare minimum transformation rules. That is a move towards simplification. So what is this? Why should we talk about simplification at all? It is not merely for it's not that grammar becomes simpler pedagogically, nothing like that. Pedagogically, nothing. It has no pedagogical implications. The system has to be simple, because a really good sort of system is that which is economical and elegant. So the requirements of economy and elegance, which are borrowed from sciences, okay, so they would require that this science also must develop in that way. So a kind of so in terms of form, in formal terms, the grammar underwent this important change, and so that the grammar becomes simplified, not in the pedagogical sense, simplified in the sense in which mature sciences like physics use the notion simplify and elegant. So this is government and binding. Okay, government and binding. I think I hope Madam Sanjukta ji and Anil Thakur Sahab are there. And of course Professor Sri Kumar is here. So so always they correct me. I think there are 3 phrase structure rules or base rules in government and binding, and barely 1 transformation move alpha. Okay, so if I remember, because that's a long time ago. So in any case, so this is what they were trying to do. So what would be the next natural step? The next natural step would be, completely do away with phrase structure rules. Okay, and also sort of no transformations, nothing. Completely do away with it. So if you can succeed, what have you achieved? If you succeed, you have achieved, simplicity in your grammatical system. Okay, you may or may not achieved, see, this kind of simplicity, if you achieve, then you are creating some other structures. Okay, like if you don't have movements, you have checking devices. Okay, so so you have to measure now. With checking devices, which in and this thing out, movements out. How does the notion of simplification work? Okay, so so these are the things that have to be. These are things that are important. Okay, sometimes what happens is, I hope this doesn't happen to generative linguistics. Sometimes what happens is that you see, when people work, the progress is in technical terms. In terms of simplification and things like that, in formal terms, pure formalism. Okay, so so there is a kind of rigorous. There is a kind of the growth is in making along the dimension of making it simple in this sense, economical and all that. So there is a kind of formal rigor. Okay, and towards economy, but the domain of data that it has to explain does not develop. It doesn't really increase. Now, if that happens, that's an unfortunate thing as far as I am concerned. Okay, and you can ask me, who the hell are you to say that you are concerned? Okay, how do we bother about you? But please take note that you see, if a theory becomes more and more formal, and it achieves greater formal rigor and all that. Okay, questions of simplification, simplicity will also arise. Okay, namely, whether movement is whether a grammar is movement is simpler, or a grammar with various checking sort of devices simpler. All these questions will arise. How do you really measure, talk about how do you evaluate simplicity in this way? But in any case, that doesn't interest me. What interests me is this: that you see, if a model or if a theory develops only in terms of formalism, and the data domain that it had to explain does not increase, it is not, for as far as I am concerned, a very happy thing for a theory. Okay, so so I don't know. So I mean, there are younger people and people who are doing generative linguistics right now. So they would tell me. But my fear at some point of time was that this was actually happening. That there was a danger that this was happening because people are working more and more formal towards this formalization. Okay, so all this is an attempt by Noam Chomsky to make the thing scientific. Make it scientific. Okay. Now the question arises, all right, you are saying that your theory is scientific and all that. You don't conduct laboratory experiments. You don't conduct laboratory experiments. How do you test your theory? Okay, I mean, a scientific theory has to be tested. If it can't be tested, and if then it is not a scientific theory at all. Okay, so the question of testing. Now go back to the earlier days. Chomsky said that, look, the goal of my enterprise is to study competence. Later, the word competence was abandoned and other terms started getting used. Let us use the term knowledge of language. Okay, so competence means, he was saying that grammar, that I am trying to study competence. Now we can translate it without any loss of meaning to this project is trying to study the knowledge of language, or in more psychological terms, initial state of knowledge of language. So let's put it like that. Now he said that what kind of experiments can you conduct? Suppose and the relation between competence and performance is that performance is only a poor reflection of competence. Okay, so let us take, for example, one of the standard texts, but now I'm sure they must be using many more interesting tests. But at that time, let us say they were saying that active, you apply a passive transformation, active becomes passive. So which means it takes a little longer. So they did the reaction time tests. And Chomsky said, all the tests that you are devising are tests of performance, but I'm not studying performance at all. I'm studying competence. So so he said these are not, so my theory cannot be, sort of rejected or falsified or questioned on the basis of tests which apply to performance. They don't apply to competence. But then, the question is, then how do but then the question is, you can't say that your theory cannot be falsified. So a scientific theory is falsifiable in principle. That's something which generative linguists always accepted. So what do you do? So what we do is, let us say there is the X-bar theory. What we do is, you work on other languages, right? X-bar theory was not proposed on the basis of, let us say, Odia. Okay, so I work on Odia, and then if I find, powerful, really good reasons as to why X-bar theory cannot work, then that becomes important. So that is our testing. That is the way you test theory. So it is more like not exactly. It's more like the way, more like astronomy in this sense. More like astronomy in this sense than physics. Okay, it's more like astronomy. Okay, what you do is you have observations directly from nature. You don't replicate nature in the laboratory. You have direct observation of things in nature. Similarly, what we do is, let us say we are testing X-bar theory. So that theoretical proposal can, I work on Odia, and if my my work shows on Odia shows that X-bar theory does not work, for Odia, then that becomes a counterexample. So Chomsky had said, look, our theories are falsifiable in principle, and they can be falsified in the following way. Namely, whatever, does it really matter how they have been proposed? Whether, nothing is actually proposed entirely deductively. So no matter how it is proposed, okay, now it has to stand the test of scrutiny from other languages. Not direct data, but analyzed, but sort of like X-bar theory can be falsified by a different organization of entities within the phrase. So things like that. So this is how the field was becoming, growing into from a classificatory science to a mature science, a science that tries to explain things. Okay. So this is the fascinating story that I wanted to share with you, my understanding of this. Okay. Okay. Now, a couple of other things, I will, sir, I must have exceeded my limit, no? Time? Can I make just 2 points, 1 or 2 points quickly? Just 2 points quickly?
Sir, please, you can proceed, sir.
Okay. Just, quickly, so far, I will not pursue this point. So far, yeah, maybe, yeah, I will not pursue this point, but, oh, no, there is a story to tell. So I must tell you the story, okay? Now, see, when you study structure, you don't study function. Okay. Now, some philosophers were telling Chomsky that you cannot study linguistic structure without studying function, its function. Because according to me, they argued that fundamental to language, right, is the function of communication. Okay. Chomsky questioned that. Chomsky questioned it in a certain way, and I don't want to go into that here now. Chomsky said, I'm just quoting him, that language is a lousy mode of communication. He uses the word lousy, okay? And he gives reasons as to why he says it is lousy. That is of no interest to us right now. What is of interest is, can we study language structure without reference to language function? Okay. So, and particularly when the claim was that people have been using language extensively, I mean, that is obvious. Okay. Therefore, therefore, language is made for communication. Language is made for communication. Now, Professor Nirmalaksha Mukherjee and me, he is the one who told me this. And later I read it somewhere, but we talked about it a couple of times, but I have forgotten all the sources. Okay. And it is like this. It's a very interesting example. It's not Chomsky's, but somebody else's. It is like this. See, there are cracks on the tree trunks. Okay. And some insects and all that get into those cracks. Okay. And what monkeys do is, monkeys, take twigs or little sticks kind of thing, and push them into those, cracks, and take the termites out and eat them. Okay. So this is what monkeys do, right? So the monkeys use, some part of the tree to extract their food from the tree. They use a branch or a twig or a stick from the tree and all that. Now, the argument is this, that you see, monkeys use, tree means part of the tree, stick or whatever, okay, branch or whatever. Monkeys use that for the purpose of, getting their food or whatever, for a certain purpose. From that, we cannot conclude that trees were made because monkeys will use them in a certain way. Okay. Just because monkeys are using it for a certain purpose, it does not follow that the trees were made so that monkeys could use. Chomsky has questioned this kind of attitude. He gives an example of the heart, for example. He says that, these cells of the heart did not get together saying that, no, now we have a function to perform. So let's get together, these cells form a heart and then pump blood. So any kind of purposive, any kind of purposiveness, he doesn't accept any kind of purposiveness. He says that structure has to be studied as structure without reference to purpose, function, and things like that. And meaning we know, so that's an important thing. To say that function is one thing, but structure is another. So that is the way he narrowed, and that is the way he made it, scientific. Okay. And yeah, and just one or two more points that, and we conclude. And yeah. See, Chomsky is the first person in the history of linguistics. And when I say history of linguistics, I am talking about the history of linguistics that started 2,500 years ago or even earlier in various cultures. He is the first person, and it's not that geniuses sort of fall from the sky and all that. No, it's not like that. I don't believe in that. In any case, But the fact remains that he is the first person who combined two different questions. Question number one, what is the structure of language? It has sentences, or sentences are made, like that, constructed like that, whatever, and morphemes, phonemes, morphemes, etc., etc. So with sentences, words, morphemes, and the way they're organized and all that. So so that is how we study structure. That's the traditional study. Okay, so that is one. The other thing is, how is a language learned? Bimal Matilal, I was looking at Bimal Matilal to find out what the traditional Indians had to say. So he says ancient Indians, he doesn't refer to which people, but occasionally I find references of the Nayaka philosophers. So in any case, so whoever. So in any culture, these two questions are different. How is language learned, and what is the structure of language? These are different questions requiring different answers. Okay. Most of these answers were, in our culture, for example, are behaviorist. Behaviorist, but that's okay. Sort of that's okay. So in any case, so these are two different questions. So how is a language learned? We'll answer it in saying that, okay, it is learned from the lexicon, it is learned from the teachers, when the teachers speak, whatever, it learns from experience and things of that kind. So that is one. Particularly, we get knowledge from experience. Okay. On the other hand, no, we don't get knowledge from experience directly. There is always an intervention. And the intervention is something that is given to us. In terms of what is given to us, we make sense of experience. So what is it? So what is it given? Something is given to us. Let us say, some kind of knowledge is given to us. Call it the initial state of knowledge of language. Okay. So how do we learn a language? There is a language that we are born with a knowledge of language. That knowledge of language, we can work out. How do we work out that knowledge? Call it the initial state of knowledge of language. That initial state of knowledge of language is that knowledge which we have before we are exposed to any human language. Okay, so in terms of that language is given to us, we make sense of the languages that we are exposed to. So we develop grammars of, Odia, English, Tamil, whatever it is. Okay, so that's the answer. Now, what is that initial state of knowledge of language? How do I describe it? How do I talk about it? The theory of using, universal grammar, or whatever you call it. Okay, now look at the way they are connected. Ask the question, how is a language learned? You start with something like, we are born with an initial state of knowledge of language. What is that initial state of language? How do you describe it? You describe it in structural terms, universal grammar and parameters and all that kind of thing. Okay, so look at the way the questions are related. They were all two different questions, and that answers given to them were of a different nature. Now these two questions are asked, and the answer, the questions remain, but the answer is the same. Somewhere there is a connection. So this connection is extremely important, and because of this, Chomsky said that one of the evaluation measures of grammar, that is what is called explanatory adequacy. A grammar will have explanatory adequacy if it can explain language acquisition better. This is actually what he meant. Okay, now see, I'll tell you about an experience about how we get knowledge. Okay, and the experience is this. See, I was staying in Simla, and Simla, this Indian Institute of Advanced Study, had a nice guest house, and I was staying in room number 2. And in room number 2, there were a huge room. There were some pictures on the wall, and on my bed, right on my bed, which I could see, there was a picture of a woman. And what I used to do is, when I would go to sleep, I would put a thick towel on that picture and sleep. In the morning, I will remove the towel because it frightened me. Okay, and in a seminar at the institute, I made this point. In some connection, I don't have to go into those details. I made this point. Many people who were there, quite a few of them, came to my room to see the picture. And they said, now what is this? We don't see anything. Then I said, bhai, ye to baat hai. Actually, the thing is this, that you see, knowledge doesn't come directly from experience. I have one kind of knowledge, you have another kind of knowledge. The reason is there is something in the mind which really intervenes. So this is what Plato said when he said, that how do we make sense out of experience? How do we make sense out of experience? We make sense out of experience because of something that is given to us. He called it something else. And the same idea Chomsky uses when he says, when he attacks the behaviorists and say that behaviorism doesn't explain how knowledge is, acquired. Knowledge is acquired because of intervention of something that is already given to us. Okay, so in any case, so one final point I'll make. Chomsky was asked, earlier he was asked, what do you think you are doing? Okay, you are talking about all this. Are you really discovering some truth about the human mind? Are you discovering the truth? Or is it just a kind of theorization? Okay, nice, neat, Chomsky's answer was, I don't remember exactly what he said, but essentially it was like this, that I remember. He said, no, we are not playing, we are not playing games. We are sincere about it. What we are discovering is theory. Sorry, what we are discovering is the reality, the fact, what is there in nature. Okay. Now, if you take that view, okay, then you are not doing what the physical science, what the sort of mature sciences are doing. In mature sciences, there is always a debate whether say something like whether in nature there is something like the gravitational rule operating in, or gravitational rule is only a theoretical construct to explain certain things. What is it? If it is a theoretical construct, it is our imagination. Sort of we have a theorization, but that gravitational, that particular gravitational law 1, 2, 3, they are there in nature. You can't say anything about that. Okay. So there is this debate in science. Are we really going for truth, or are we really going for, interesting theories? So scientists, are divided, but I mean, as far as I am concerned, as far as I know, that most people would think, people would think, no, actually we are really creating theories, and somehow the theories really predict phenomena, but we do not know whether nature is really like that. Similarly, Chomsky was saying, conversely, in contradiction, Chomsky was saying, no, nature, it is not like that. We are really trying to discover things. But in 2002, in a book, Chomsky says, we are actually creating intelligible theories of the universe. Universe means universe of language. Intelligible theories of universe. So he was not saying we are really discovering the truth. We are saying that we are only making intelligible theories of the universe. So if that is what you claim for your discipline, then sort of you are really making the same claims as quite many sort of scientists are claiming for their own disciplines. Namely, we don't know what nature is really like, but we have our theories, our elegant theories and all that, and they really predict, sort of they predict phenomena, and somehow they happen. And one thing I would say before I sort of close is that Chomsky has been able to sort of say that he, going by his work, we are discovering human nature. What is it to be human? What is it to be human? What is to be human means, we are the ones who use language, let us say one way. So ability to use, having language and ability to use, this is what makes us human. Okay. Now, and there has been a wonderful debate between Chomsky and Foucault on this issue. So I am presenting the conclusion of Chomsky's conclusion of this, Chomsky's position in a very, very informal way. Okay, but something that is interesting, that is this. See, in 2002, this is the result of interdisciplinary kind of work. Okay, some people who are working on animal behavior. They came to the conclusion that, see, there are songbirds which can mimic human sounds, and which means they have a kind of sound repertoire, and there are certain kinds of sort of species, namely chimpanzees and tamarind of monkeys, which which have some kind of a semantic repertoire, almost like humans, but in a very rudimentary stage. Interesting thing is, those who have the semantic repertoire do not have the sound repertoire. Those who have the sound repertoire do not have a semantic repertoire. So if you have property X, some species property X, it doesn't have property Y. Another species which has the property Y but doesn't have property X. But in human beings, sound meaning connection takes place. Now, how does it happen? How sound meaning connection takes place in nature and manifest in humans? We do not know. We just do not know. They say it's an emergent, sort of feature that it's something that is emergent that has happened. Okay, so the earlier we used to say that we are humans because we know language, because language is species specific. That is the statement, language is species specific. So that research showed that no, we have to make a little change. Sound meaning connection is species specific. So we have to rigorously define language to mean sound meaning connection, and only sound meaning connection is species specific. Okay. And when I read this paper, a friend of mine from Delhi, from IIT Delhi sent it to me. When I read this paper, I had taught lots of undergraduate students and some of them were in touch with me. I wrote frantic letters to everybody. During those days, I couldn't write on the computer and all, no email. So frantic letters, hey, whatever I taught you is wrong. So language is not species specific. What is species specific is sound meaning connection. Okay, I'll read this paper. So, sort of, and that was an exciting thing that happened in my life. Okay. So to conclude, I will only say that, you see, people like, us, people of our generation have been lucky in the sense that, you see, we have participated maybe as foot soldiers and nothing more, doesn't really matter. But we have participated in doing generative linguistics, in applying generative linguistic models to our own languages. Somebody has applied government and binding model. I applied aspects model. During those days, that was the model. So, we have been doing it. Okay. So we have that experience. All of us who applied that model to our languages, we are doing actually theory testing. We're doing theory testing. So we did it. And, and Chomsky, and it was a good thing, Chomsky is alive. And some of us were lucky to meet him and to even speak to him, interact with him. It's a very happy experience, to do something which was evolving, and doesn't matter whatever we did, important, unimportant, that doesn't matter at all. But we all did theory testing, whoever really did that. And then, I was lucky also to meet Chomsky and ask him, certain questions and all that. And to live in that kind of time, to undergo that excitement, that is something which I will cherish. It is not so much generative linguistics. It's about doing it, enjoying it, and cherishing it. Sir, I have wasted a lot of your time. Please forgive me.
No. It is very nice.
I don't know, yeah. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Professor. It's a very interesting talk, actually. Congratulations, and we are really enjoying your talk.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Please, Ramamurthy, please unmute your. Okay.
Professor Patnaik.
Ji.
It was an excellent lecture, sir. I always enjoy your lectures.
Thank you very much.
Actually, the way you present the matters, even a very toughest thing, in your way, in a very, very casual, very logical way, you present this. And I always enjoy this one. My own trivial question is, you are very well deep inside the Chomskyan perspective, but you have given in the topic that outsider's perspective. Why this kind of...
I will give an answer to that. Okay. See, when I was doing my PhD research, I was beginning to... Sorry? Can I answer?
Yeah. Yes.
When I was beginning to do my PhD research, Professor Nadkarni was my supervisor. Some of you would even know him.
Yes, yes.
You know, so Professor M.V. Nadkarni was my PhD supervisor. So sometimes I would go to him and ask him about competence, performance, this and that, you know, and all those things. So one day he told me, he said, "Dekho, Patnaik, see, these are all drawing room talk, okay? So, but linguistics linguistics is about doing it, okay? You do linguistics, analyze your language, you know, study your language, draw your trees, draw this, do that. That is linguistics, and this is not linguistics, okay? So I did my PhD thesis that way. And that is how we all, I mean, we all do it. But this interest remained in me. And it was my great fortune, I must say, when I ran into Nirmalakshmi Mukherjee. Nirmalakshmi Mukherjee is a philosopher. So him and me, we talked for hours and hours and hours, talking about, you know, what kind of science linguistics is. And also my friends, you know, in IIT, you know, sort of, I mean, Professor Mahapatra and many others, you know, so we would sit together and then, you know, sometimes I would ask them, okay, you know, I mean, what is elegance? You know, I mean, why should the theory be elegant? And then we said, on the one hand, we say we need biological structure. You know, mind is we are really studying a part of the mind which is a biological thing. Mind is a biological object. We are not studying artificial intelligence, you know, where, I mean, where, you know, they study non-biological intelligence. We are studying, you know, I mean, human mind, which is a biological thing. Now, if it is a biological thing, why should my grammar be redundancy free? You know, biological systems are not redundancy free. Why should grammar be redundancy free? It would be redundancy free only if you say that the theory has to be simple, elegant, economical, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Okay. You know, but you see, but then how is it biological? So, you know, there are many questions which remained in me. I could not, you know, sort of, but we were sitting together and chatting and talking about these things. So you know, I was very happy that the kinds of things I wanted to talk about, but I couldn't, and learn from others, I just couldn't. That is because I didn't get an opportunity. You know, I mean, if you are, see, if you are teaching linguistics in everywhere, you know, not just in universities, IITs, wherever you are teaching linguistics, you are teaching only linguistics, you know, how to do linguistics. Okay, but how to do philosophy of linguistics? Philosophy of linguistics, which is different from philosophy of language. When you do philosophy of linguistics, you know, what do you do? Fortunately for me, you know, IIT was a good place. Okay, when I was teaching PhD students, I did not teach any of those things. Okay, so model and how to apply the model. But when I was to undergraduates, I used to teach this thing to undergraduates. So, you know, so that is the kind of thing. So I am an outsider to the extent that I am not writing transformation, generative grammars of Odia, but to that extent I am an outsider. So otherwise, these are the questions which, you know, sort of interest me still.
Very interesting, sir.
I see something on chat 12 and all. I can't understand these things. I can't respond. You know, something is written chat 12. I don't know what to do with that. In any case,
Sri Kumar.
No, I don't want to do anything because otherwise, you know,
I'm here. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Oh.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Sir, it was a nice talk. I enjoyed the talk. You brought up many issues. I was
Professor Sri Kumar is speaking, sir. Professor Sri Kumar is speaking.
Okay. Sir, it was an interesting talk. I enjoyed your talk. You brought out many issues which are interesting, and it, you know, some of them were they helped. They were, you know, quite some of the connections we have not seen earlier. I was just wondering about one thing that you mentioned, that Chomsky said that something unique about human beings is that they connect meaning and sound and meaning. But then how does that connect with you know, arbitrariness of connection between sound and meaning?
That Saussurean arbitrariness.
Yes, so Chomsky also mentions it, that, you know, it's something arbitrary, and you know, probably he talks about it from the perspective of refocusing linguistics in for study of design features or sorry, not
yeah.
what was it?
Yeah.
Something like
These two things have not been
that
related.
was his argument for virtual conceptual necessities, something like that, I suppose.
So these are not related in the sense that this Saussurean arbitrariness. Chomsky has what Chomsky has said is that you see words don't mean anything. People use words to mean things. So words acquire meaning through use. So that is what he he says. That is one thing. But that idea has no connection with whether evolution has a break or not. There are two views on evolution. One is evolution has been continuous. There is nothing that the humans do, or nothing that the humans do that some species in some rudimentary form did not do. So that is one view. The other view is evolution had a break, and the argument comes through language. So earlier also they were saying that evolution has a break because no other species. When you say language is species specific, species specific. So then we used to say that is a language is a break in the evolution. What these people did was this is a very fascinating paper, Professor Srikumar, 2002 paper, the Hauser, Chomsky, and Fitts. It appeared in Science. If you like, I can give you the reference. But in any case, the idea is that you see they said that that is, whereas that is true, that it shows that evolution has a break, surely because that could not be explained. But what itself is language? In what sense is language species specific? So if there are other species who could imitate human sound, if there are other species who had the sense of meaning like the humans have, so they also have, in some rudimentary form they had these attributes of language, but they could not connect because the tamarind of monkeys and chimpanzees, they could not they could not mimic human sounds, they could only grunt. And parrots and singing birds could imitate human sounds, but they had no sense of meaning. So you see, so the other species had either sound or meaning, but in no species was this combined. So this idea that evolution has a break, this idea sort of can work even without this research. But this research has given us given us an idea about what it is that what is it that we share with animals and other species, and how what we have is different from them. So there, sort of that's something which is interesting. And then there is another, that's a technical point. The other thing is, so what is specific? What is typically sort of what is the key thing of language from the point of view of structure? The only thing that was said, that they said is, what is only recursion is something which is part of language. If you're talking language universal, then it has then it is basically having recursion. That is why you remember, Professor, Srikumar, some years ago, some people said that there is a language, I keep forgetting his name, that language doesn't have recursion.
Everett, somebody called Everett.
There is some language which doesn't have recursion. Okay. So if you can show that a particular language does not have recursion, then it undermines the theory of universals as proposed by the generative linguists today. But it was found that the claim was made not on the basis of made virtually on analyzed data. It was not. See, as Chomsky had already said, and I had presented that you cannot contest a theory through raw data. The raw data has to be transformed into a theoretical, into an appropriate theoretical statement to be able to contest a theory or not. So that had not happened. And I wrote a personal letter to Chomsky. Okay, so I gave a lot of arguments based on discourse to say why this argument about recursion is not correct. Okay, now Chomsky gave a reply, and the reply is this: He did not say anything about any of the arguments I had given. He just ignored them. But he said that, yeah, what has happened is that, this same thing, that the data, that if you really analyze the data and confront, and you see, then you will see that, there is recursion. So you can't, so it is a kind of, basically unanalyzed data that was being projected as contesting the theory. And then he sent me 3 papers and he said, read these papers, okay? And by then I was doing Sara Mahabharat, so, I didn't have much time for getting into this debate.
Please, Nair, sir.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Professor Patnaik. I'm Rajashekhar Nair.
Yes, sir.
I have few things to say now.
Yeah.
The first one is, I want to share one incident when I met Professor Chomsky when he visited Trivandrum.
Great.
It was not a linguistics talk. He came to Kerala at the invitation of the government of Kerala at that time.
I know. Yeah,
I was present at that time. I went there. It was a huge meeting, maybe around some 2,000 people.
And
they were around 2,000 people. And there in the bookstall inside the hall, there was a bookstall. I bought a Malayalam book about Chomsky. Then I showed him, I talked to him for about a minute or so. He was very happy. I was also, it was a very pleasant one. I wanted his signature on my book. And he put his signature and said, okay, I bless you. So still I am keeping it. This happened some 20 years ago. Maybe.
How beautiful.
Yeah. Sir, you have explained the expert theory in a very elaborate way. I have a very small question to you.
Yeah.
What is actually the impact of the application of Chomskyan theory to Odia language?
Yeah. So by the way, it is like this, we have some of us, some 7 or 8 of us. All of us most of us did our PhD in IFLU, CIFL. And some others, did their PhD in Delhi and other universities. Now, all of us did this, and we looked at various kinds of, constructions in Oriya. But so that is what we did, and all this work is virtually unpublished. The reason is none of us, if I am correct, none of us after PhD went back to teach linguistics.
Oh.
We all, I was lucky because I taught English and linguistics. So linguistics I taught, at least 40% of my work at IIT or 50% was to teach linguistics, or another 50% was the English and all. But many of these other, persons that I'm talking about, they all went back and taught literature in various government colleges in Odisha and did not pursue the subject at all. So you see, it's that way it's not in a very healthy state. So can I take 1 minute? See, if you ask me, sir, Professor Rajashekhar, hello.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, if you ask me, give me an example of a garden path sentence. Okay, I will give you an example of garden path sentence from English. You ask me, give me an example of structurally ambiguous sentence in English. I will say the proof, stop, whatever. Okay. Now, if you ask me, give me an example of all these things, whether it's a parasitic gap sentence or whether, this sentence, that sentence in Odia, I can't answer.
I see.
This is the problem. This is a very big problem. That when we teach, we always draw our examples. When we teach generative grammar, we use our examples from English. Probably it is happening all over the world. I'm not saying it's happening just here. But the point is, so long as we are not able to, have our own examples, okay. So there will be some kind of, it's not a very good thing very healthy thing for the discipline to grow in our own setup. This is my answer. What do we, I really don't know.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Please, Ravi Shankar, sir.
Yeah. Good evening, Professor. Thank you. I'm Dr. Ravi Shankar from Pondicherry. Sir, in the recent past, I have come across some comments which say that there is nothing like universal grammar that you have been claiming for long years. But those comments were sporadic only. But what is your opinion on that comment, sir?
I buy the idea of universal grammar.
Yes, sir.
I buy the idea, but whether the difference would be in terms of what is the content of the universal grammar. Okay. For example, in the 80s, Chomsky was saying that X-bar theory is a part of universal grammar.
Okay.
But 10 years after, he would say, no, X-bar theory ko hata diya hai. They just removed X-bar theory. But it is my view is they brought X-bar theory through the back door. Okay, but they won't say that. Okay, chhodiye. So, but if you read the 2002 paper, which I just referred to, there they are saying only recursion is the content of the universal grammar. So the difference is with respect to what is the content of universal grammar. But universal grammar as such cannot be questioned, because it explains how languages are systematically different from each other, systematically different, not arbitrarily different. For example, so one simple example, sir. See, suppose we say we have subject, object, and verb. Suppose, they take three categories. We can combine them into 8 types. I think it is 8 types, okay? So now if we can combine them with 8 types, we see that certain kinds of languages having, surface, certain kinds of languages do not surface, okay? Like SOV languages are there, SOV are there, VSO, etc., etc. But certain kinds of arrangements are not there. How does one explain this? Why is nature with respect to language like this? Some logically possible combinations surface, but others don't. Now that can be explained in terms of a theory of universal with parameters. But these days, so basically the difference is with respect to content. What does it contain? Rather than the fact that there is something that is common to all human languages. You call it universal grammar, you call it whatever you like.
Oh.
Sir.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I got it. Thank you. Very nice, sir.
Thank you.
We enjoyed your lecture as ever.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Right from 1990, from the time of IIT Kanpur, we are meeting and enjoying, sir.
Thank you for remembering.
Yeah, yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
Okay, sir. If there is no question, we go to vote of thanks, sir.
No, commercial?
Vijayan is ready to.
Professor Rangan wants to say something.
Please.
Yeah, looking forward.
Okay. I really enjoyed your lecture. It was very, very, very nice. It has 2 things. One is it gave a history of the development of transformation generative grammar, one side. On the other side, certain basic ideas and the development of ideas in the course of time. And the third thing is the questions about the nature of science. These 3 are very, very crucial and very important, and then you explained very nicely. The 1 or 2 things, just I will make a comment. As we said, some of the language, as you were talking about the complementation, certain languages go after the complement and after the complementation, and before that one. A similar experience I had when I was working in Delhi for my PhD. I compared Tamil and English. I was writing in 72. This was my time. When I was writing the so-called phrase structure rules, it appeared to me that it was a kind of mirror image rule. If you write a phrase structure rules, for Tamil, it is one side. And if you put it in the mirror, then the other side. It goes like that. In English. So this is an idea. I got that one. This is just like a mirror image rule. This was a very nice. And one thing is that how the structure can be compared, and it is not as wide as we imagine. You can bring certain things. This is a very, very nice experience I had. Another thing is, one thing I want to add to your lecture, the integration of semantics in linguistics or in the grammar is an important contribution of generative grammar. Earlier, if you see the structural linguistics,
yeah.
Semantics was something different.
Yeah,
It was going in a different stream.
yeah.
And structural linguistics people and formal, that is morphology, phonology, and all these things. And even in syntactic structures also, semantics was not inside.
Yeah.
And it was nicely integrated after the aspects and postal and other people.
Yeah.
So this is a very, even though there are many issues, but this is a main contribution in linguistics, integrating the semantics with the grammar. Just I want to add that one also. And there are some important things. I have also the same problem. When we are talking about the descriptive adequacy and the explanatory adequacy, one side we are increasing the tools to describe the language structure because we bring more data. Similarly, earlier also there was data which could not be described by phrase structure rules. Then you bring the tools, transformation tools. So like that, you go on adding the different kinds of rules on the one hand. On the other, when things were going on like this, then you have to control these things. So you have to reduce the power of these rules. So these two, even though they are contradictory, but it is just like a brake and accelerator in a car. So this was working very important thing. This is also a very important thing as far as your lecture is concerned. I am very much very nice thing to think. And also, as far as the theory is concerned, one can look at in two ways. One is looking at the theory as a tool to understand certain phenomena or the universe. Or the other one is it is a part of the nature of nature. Whatever the concept, whatever the things you use, it's a part of that object or phenomenon. So these two way of looking at the theories are very important, but there is no way of arguing and proving either which is right. So, but you have to take your own stand and then go ahead. So this is, I really enjoyed your lecture.
Thank you very much.
Very, very nice. So yeah, I was able to recollect whatever the things happened for the last, for 60, 70 years. Thank you very much for the nice.
I'll just sort of pursue one thing that you said. I'll just pursue it a little. Is that okay?
Yes.
So it is about semantics.
Yes.
What you said about semantics is fine, but what has happened is generative linguistics today. There's a basic thing in generative linguistics, that is, whatever semantics, whatever meaning or whatever semantics we sort of extract or we interpret, it has to be on a structure. So there has to be something in the structure, because without a structure there cannot be, so there is nothing like semantic structure from which we derive syntax. That is generative linguistics. But it is a structure. Now, so this is how it is restricted. And because it is restricted like this, we can still handle control pro, arbitrary pro, anaphora, anaphora antecedent, etc., but we cannot handle, something like, let us say, ellipsis. We cannot handle something like metaphorical meaning. We can't do that. That is because Chomsky's position is nice. He says, that look, for all these which we cannot handle, so part of the reason is that our grammatical theory does not allow it. Part of the reason is that you require world knowledge, and world knowledge is not a part of the study of structure. Why can't they study sort of ellipsis? My reason is this. My reason is this. See, if you, I used to give this example to my students. I don't want to name that person's name now. I used to say, and I used to name a Prime Minister of India during those days. Okay, how does X eat water rice? Odias eat water rice like people. All of us is rice eating belt. We eat water rice. Yes. So I said, how does this, the name of the Prime Minister, how does this X eat water rice? Okay. So, and the answer is with a spoon and a fork. Okay. You can't eat with a fork anyway. So with a fork. So what you have really deleted is, and what you understand is, X eats water rice with this. Okay. Now, the generative linguistics position is, you can only, the structure, this constituent is very important. Okay. So whether it is rule or anything else, or it's, sort of alternative mechanism, they all operate on constituents. Now, what is deleted is not a constituent.
Yes.
Sort of, he eats rice, with is not a constituent. So they cannot delete it. Okay. So if you can't delete this, okay, you say there is a pro 1, pro 2, pro 3, pro 4, like that. But how will the pro get its antecedent, So what? So, so these are kind, and what is the independent motivation for this? So I think sometimes, it is the theory, the way it is structured, keeps certain data outside its scope, which is okay. And Chomsky himself says in the 2002 book, I think, that, that 90% of the phenomena that happens outside my window, are something which physicists cannot deal with. So every discipline narrows its own, domain. So like that. So anyway, so this
very
is
nice.
Thank you very much, sir, for your very kind words and the points that you raised.
No, it's a very, very, very nice occasion. Yes, very nice occasion to see you and then enjoy this. Okay. Kamashi?
Yes, sir. Please, Vijayan.
Yes.
Sir. Yeah, good evening, everyone. It's an honor for me in proposing the vote of thanks at this event. Today we had a thought-provoking lecture from one of our eminent professor, Professor B.N. Patnaik, who gave a talk on generative enterprise and outsiders' perspective, which gave a lot of thoughts to younger generation like me. We haven't met Chomsky, but through you, we feel like we have met him. Sir, it's a pleasure and honor for us, for your presence and for giving a wonderful talk. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Professor Rangan, sir, former Registrar, Tamil University, for presiding this session. Thank you, sir. And I would like to express my gratitude to the President, Professor K. Karunaran, sir, former Vice Chancellor, Tamil University, the Secretary, Professor G. Balasubramanian, sir, the Vice Chancellor of Tamil University, and all the office bearers and executive members of Tamil Moliyal Sangam for creating this platform for lectures and discussions about language and linguistics. Thank you very much, sir. And I also thank all the professors like Dr. Kamachi, sir, Dr. Ramamurthy, sir, Dr. Arulmozhi, Dr. Selvakumar, sir, Dr. Sundarabalu, sir, Dr. Umaraj, and all the other professors who have been organizing and coordinating these events and giving us this opportunity to have an academic deliberation like this. Thank you very much, sir. And I also extend my gratitude to all the senior professors, colleagues, researchers, students, and friends for participating in today's academic deliberation. Thank you, one and all. Be safe and healthy. Thank you very much.
And happy.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Happy. And I have enjoyed every moment of my interaction, meeting friends and all. It's a delight. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. I'm grateful to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Kamashi.
Thank you, sir.
To all the people.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik, sir. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Recited by Magla.